make yourself comfortable. Allow the weight of the day to come away from your shoulders as if it were a shawl you have folded and set aside. Let your hands rest loosely, palms down or resting in your lap, and if it feels natural, close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in quietly, as if you were drawing in a soft, cool evening. Breathe out as if you were letting a single long thought ease from your chest. There is no hurry here. This is a deliberate slowing, an invitation to step beyond the day and into a place that keeps its memories in stone. Tonight we walk very gently through Pompeii, not as tourists rushing to a list of sights, but as guests in an old house, slipping across polished thresholds and listening. Imagine the lane you take is shaded, the light sifted through leaves or an awning, soft and amber, not bright enough to stir the eyes, but just enough to show texture. The cobbles, each one worn by countless small feet, the narrow gutters their dark mouths. The city has the hush of late afternoon. Even if the sun were high, we imagine it as a time of winding down, of ovens cooling, of shutters eased partway closed. Try to walk as if you do not wish to wake the echoes. Let your breath lengthen without effort, an easy, unforced pattern. As you breathe out, picture the air filling the spaces between houses, sliding along the stone like a gentle hand. With every soft exhalation, imagine another small sound dimming, a broom's soft scrape, the murmur of a distant conversation, the faint clink of a jar against a shelf. The soundscape narrows. You begin to notice detail. Ahead of us, tucked just off the main lane, a bakery keeps a small and persistent warmth. Even now, as we approach as if through a dream, you can sense the memory of that heat. The doorway is low and plain, its lintel white with a pale patina, and inside a broad oven sits like an old friend against the far wall. Imagine, perhaps, a baker standing there, a figure of patient time. Hands dusted with flour, sleeves rolled to the elbow, an apron blotched in the soft grays of use. You might notice how the flour hangs in the light like fine dusted stars when the door opens. Tiny particles that pause in the air and then settle again, as if the house itself were breathing. The smell, as if memory were sent, is gentle and warm. Yeast and grain and a hint of honey. Not the sharpness of spice, but the quiet comfort of staple bread. Picture a single loaf cooling on a windowsill, its crust cracked in a pattern that looks almost deliberate, a small art made by time and heat. Perhaps a small wooden peel leans nearby, its handle rubbed down by many hands. The baker moves with an economy born of repetition. Flour to dough, dough to hearth, hands that know where to press and where to lift. You might imagine the softness of dough under those fingers, the tiny resistance that is somehow like a reassuring pulse. Take another gentle breath, as if matching the baker's cadence. With each exhale, notice a small domestic detail. A torn napkin folded and waiting, a string tied around a parcel of figs, a child's footprint faint on the threshold dust. These are brief, unassuming marks of ordinary life, like punctuation in a long, patient sentence. They are the traces that give a house its voice. There is a quiet rhythm here, the scrape of the peel, a low hum of conversation horsed under the bakery's roof, the faint tinkle of coin on a wooden counter. None of it demands your attention. Instead, it invites you to let your gaze rest and linger. Imagine the baker turning to set the next batch, the light landing on the forearm and revealing a small scar, a line almost like a map. You do not need to know the story behind that scar. Its interest is in its presence, a mark of life as lived, as simple and true as the loaf on the sill. You might picture, at the edge of that small room, a chipped cup drying beside a basin, its rim kissed smooth by years of use. This cup will be a motif you carry with you, a quiet companion, a thing that survives and keeps, in its small, stubborn way, the echo of a hand that once lifted it. We will find this cup again, perhaps in shadow or washed by a different light, and each time it will be slightly the better for the remembering. As you breathe out, feel your shoulders soften a little more. Let the warmth of the imagined bakery settle in your chest like a small ember. Hold that ember without strain. Let it be a measure of comfort rather than heat. Ahead of us, the lane continues, turning toward a quieter quarter where the mosaic maker keeps his tools. We step more slowly now. The sound changes. The scrape of a peel grows distant, replaced by a subtler music, the patter of a hammer that rearranges the world a little at a time, the rustle of small tiles shuffled into patterns. The mosaic workshop sits partly open to the street, a low bench by the entrance, and light pools across a table where tesserae lie in little armies of color. These are not bright in the way of something new. They are the softened blues, greens, and ochres of sunlight filtered through dust. You might imagine the colors as if they were pigments in a memory box waiting to be chosen. Observe the workshop maker's hands. They are patient hands. Knuckles softened by long use, fingernails stained faintly with the hues of stone and mortar. There is a steadiness in the way they pick up each tiny tile, set it near the next, press it gently into place. It is remarkable, in a quiet way, how much can be said by arranging small things carefully. A border that curls like a sleeping vine, a sun motif whose rays are measured not in drama, but in careful proportion. The pattern, when you look more closely, is not grand storytelling. It is an everyday ordering. A floor meant to be walked on. A threshold ornament that receives footsteps without complaint. Notice how the tiles catch the light differently as someone leans over them. There's a small music in that change, a soft glint like a thought arriving and being acknowledged. Perhaps a child passes the doorway, small fingers reaching for a mislaid piece and then drawing back at the soft chiding of an elder. An exchange so ordinary that it becomes, in its repetition, the city's quiet pulse. Imagine that small hand resting for a moment on the mosaic half complete, the skin small and warm against the cool stone, and then moving away, leaving an impression in the dust that will be cleared later, a map of the day's tiny journey. Let your breath echo that careful work. Inhale as the craftsman's hand lifts, exhale as it presses the tile down. With each out-breath, sense the pattern forming, not hurried but deliberate, a demonstration of patience. There is comfort in the tiny, deliberate steps toward completion. You might think of the mosaic as a conversation stretched across minutes and hours, a thoughtful reply to the roughness of everyday life. Beyond the workshop, a narrow courtyard opens like a small lung in the city's body. Its paving stones are worn smooth, the edges rounded by countless footsteps. A low amphora slants at one side, its lip chipped but steady, and near it a cluster of linen hangs on a rope, fluttering faintly in the breath of the air. Sunlight slips down the courtyard walls, catching a single pressed flower between two tiles. A small blossom desiccated into a papery memory. That pressed bloom will be another refrain you notice again and again. It is the city's quiet talisman, a reminder of the fragile things people choose to keep. In the courtyard, the domesticity deepens. A basin sits on a trestle, water ringed with faint sediment that tells of chores past. A child's toy, a simple terracotta figurine, its features smoothed by being clasped and dropped and clasped again, rests on a threshold as if abandoned for a moment. Everything here seems to be paused rather than ended. There is the sense of lives folded gently over one another, a kind of neighborliness expressed in the smallest acts, sharing the shade of a wall, leaving a bowl for a passing guest, sweeping the step outside the door so the whole lane breathes easier. You may imagine an elder in that courtyard, perhaps sitting on a low stool, mending a sandal with slow, sure fingers. The work itself is unassuming. It will not be admired in any grand way, yet it sustains movement and journey. Watch how the elder's eyes travel to the horizon from time to time, not with longing, but with attention, noting the light as it shifts. There is tenderness in such routine, a constancy that holds the household together. Picture the elder smiling, quietly, at something small, a neighbor's child humming to herself as she passes, or a cat curled into a warm parcel of shadow. These are the gestures that make a place habitable. Pause another gentle breath here. Exhale the day's residue with a thought of the pressed flower and the chipped cup. Anchor yourself in the ordinary. These small objects are like pebbles in the pocket of a life well traveled. They hold histories without demanding to tell them. You might imagine running your fingers carefully across the rim of the chipped cup, feeling in the imperfection a human touch reaching across centuries. In doing so, you are not prying into mystery, but acknowledging continuity. The lane leads us onward, away from close domestic smells and into spaces that were meant for gathering. The Forum is not a stage for roaring crowds in this imagining. It is a place of quiet presence, a broad expanse of stone where conversation used to ripple and now settles like dust. The columns stand in patient rows, their surfaces smoothed by rain and hands and time. Imagine them as a choir that no longer sings, but still keeps rhythm in their silence. The seats of the smaller meeting areas are polished not by grandeur, but by regular use. Footsteps, the glide of sandals, the resting shoulder of someone deep in thought. You might see the curve of an amphitheater in the distance, its arc softened by shadow, seats arranged in a careful embrace as if to hold an audience in warmth. Even empty, such places speak of people gathered, not always for spectacle, but for the simple fact of being together. The stone of the public spaces remembers weight, the press of bodies leaning in to hear someone speak, the small shufflings before conversation begins. In the hush of the imagined late afternoon, the amphitheater seems to exhale, as if releasing the memory of applause into the air and then letting it scatter like dust motes. At the edge of the city, if you incline your step just so and give attention to the line where stone meets sky, you can imagine a glimpse of the sea. There is a saline suggestion in the farthest breath of air, a hint of horizon beyond the rooftops. The coast, as if seen through a mist, lends the city a sense of margin, a place that borders on movement and the unknown. The sound of the seaside is subdued in this telling, a distant, patient murmur, hardly news but a steady background that reminds the city it is not an island unto itself. You might imagine fishermen mending nets somewhere near the shore, their hands as well practiced as the mosaicists, their conversations rung through with the same small kindnesses. Let the thought of the sea widen your own breath. Imagine drawing in a faint salt note along with the evening air and letting it settle in your chest. There is room in that inhalation for more than memory. There is a sense of belonging to a larger cadence, to tides and seasons that are not frantic but enduring. Halfway through our walk, a motif returns to catch your attention. The pressed flower, tucked now beneath the lip of a doorway, and then again on a bench by the forum steps. Each time it appears, it does so like a punctuation mark reminding you of smallness. How even a single petal can anchor a memory. You might feel that the flower is a small, resigned courage, choosing to keep the being soft against stone. We circle back to a quieter street where life continues in subtler rhythms. A market stall stands with the remains of its day's goods arranged carefully. A stack of olives, a small tray of figs, a pile of what might have once been garlands now laid to rest in the shade. The vendor, an echo more than a person, has left a small cloth draped over the table like an act of care. One could imagine the vendor's hands smoothing the cloth in the morning and smoothing it again at dusk, gestures that stitch time with habit. Nearby, beneath an awning, a companionless householder tends a shallow brazier, stirring a pot that sends up a savory whisper rather than a shout. The steam curls lazily and carries with it the kind of scent that makes you think of supper rather than banquet. There is humility in such cooking, food made neither to impress nor to claim, but to sustain. Picture a bowl set aside for someone expected home late, left untouched for a while and then warmed again. These acts of small caring echo the broader tenderness we are coming to feel for this place. That within ordinary routines, people leave traces of thoughtfulness. As the light continues its slow descent, your breathing follows suit, unhurried and deepening. With each exhale, imagine the city's noise, imagined or remembered, calming further. The stones accept sound and release it in softer echoes. The city is generous in what it keeps. A child's laugh folded into a courtyard, a neighbor's borrowed cup returned with a little loaf tied in cloth. These are immaterial things, perhaps, and yet their memory gives a kind of solidity to life that outlasts errant fortune. You might imagine, in a small domestic scene that needs almost no embellishment, a neighbor standing at a doorway with 2 loaves cupped in a cloth, offering one to another who waits with hands slightly extended. There is no fanfare, no speech of great consequence, simply the passing of bread, the contact of 2 palms for a second, the recipient tucking the loaf under an arm like a small, precious thing. The exchange is a threaded melody in the city's ongoing song. It tells us gently that human tenderness is often practical, quiet, and necessary. This quiet act is our soft crest, not dramatic, but emotionally true. It suggests continuity, that kindness persists whether shouted or whispered. Notice how your breathing mirrors this notion. Inhale the image. Exhale, letting it settle in your limbs. The feeling of being cared for, even abstractly through an imagined gesture, allows the body to relax in trust. You are, even as you listen, held in that fold. We linger as if to savor the ordinary, and let the city's small gestures accumulate into an impression rather than a story. The impression is that life here was made of unremarkable beauty. Clay jars fixed with patient hands, the sound of a broom sweeping a step, a child's toy left to be found later. These elements feel intimate enough to touch without disturbing, like a linen kept safe in a drawer. There is, at times, a temptation to fill such scenes with explanation or speculation, to assign names, to tell private histories in detail. But in our quiet walk, we resist that impulse. Instead, we allow the echoes to remain echoes, suggestions of life, invitations to imagine without asserting. When you imagine the child who left the toy, you are not required to know their full biography. Their presence is a tender shorthand for continuity and surprise. When you think of the mosaic maker, you need not know his lineage. His patient hands speak for themselves. As the hour tilts toward early evening in this dreamlike city, you sense a soft closing. Shutters are eased farther closed, and households move toward the small rituals that make a space a refuge. We have not yet reached the frescoed rooms where faded paint hints at scenes of domestic celebration, nor the shoreline where the sea murmurs in the distance. Those will come as we continue, like rooms we will enter one by one. For now, allow the images you have gathered, the loaf cooling on a sill, the mosaicist's careful fingers, the pressed flower, to settle like a blanket across your thoughts. Before we step deeper, there is a small invitation I will offer, gently. If you enjoy quiet walks like this, a gentle follow helps us bring more stories to your nights. No pressure, only an unobtrusive gesture to keep such evenings coming should you wish them. Take another long, easy breath. With your out-breath, imagine the city's light dimming to a softer hue. Imagine the stones absorbing that light and holding on to it, like memory storing warmth. There is a slow quality to this story, not a march to a conclusion, but a patient unfolding. And for the next part of our walk we will step into rooms where color once declared itself more vividly. A frescoed room, whose faded palette still carries the echo of a festival. A small seaside glance where salt and stone have met for generations. For now, though, remain with the quiet. The hum of a distant conversation softened by walls. The tiny flute of wind threading through an open lattice. The tactile knowledge that ordinary acts, done with care, become the richest of inheritances. Let that thought be your companion as we continue. For now, though, remain with the quiet. The hum of a distant conversation softened by walls. The tiny flute of wind threading through an open lattice. The tactile knowledge that ordinary acts, done with care, become the richest of inheritances. Let that thought be your companion as we continue. We ease through a narrow entrance and into a room whose walls hum with color beneath the dust. The frescoed parlor is smaller than you might expect, as if the house chose intimacy over display. The paint that once declared stories and feasts is now a gentle, murmuring presence. Look, if you will, not for a single grand scene, but for the pattern of gestures. A painted hand offering a cup, a suggestion of a wreath, a ribbon curled in a way that seems to echo the way someone might have casually tied their hair. The pigments are subdued by time. The crimsons are more like the inside of a well-worn cloak than a shout. The blues are the hush of shadow under a shutter. Yet the images remain, as if someone had spoken in low tones, and the paint had replied. The furnishings are modest and exact. A low table, the footprint of a chair long absent, a woven mat whose fibers still hold the memory of souls passing over them. On the table you will find the chipped cup again, half buried beneath the subtle talc of settling dust, its rim rounded and known to many hands. You might imagine, with a tenderness that asks nothing of you, that someone once set this cup down after pouring a cooling draught. Perhaps they lifted it to the light to read the sheen of grains floating there, then set it aside to answer a neighbor's soft call. The cup, small and ordinary, is proof enough that domestic acts carry the gravity of care. There are traces of celebration here, too, but they are not loud. A painted garland curls above a doorway like a memory of laughter. A small table painted in one corner holds, in the fresco, a bowl of fruit whose gloss has become a suggestion rather than a demonstration. It suggests, rather than declares, the pleasure of shared food. You might picture someone smoothing the plaster with an idle palm as they pass, leaving a smudge like a fingerprint across a remembered feast. Such smudges, literal and metaphorical, are the city's handwriting. Move your attention now to the floor, where a narrow rug suggests the path one would take across the room. It is soft with wear. Each faded thread implies the rhythm of daily life. Footsteps to the door, to the oven, to the window where one would watch the light change. The sun, when it fell into this room, did so in slanted bands that traveled across the painted figures, making their faces more intimate at certain hours and more mysterious at others. You might imagine them waking and sleeping beneath that same wandering light. In one quiet corner, sheltered from the main room by an open textile that might once have served as a curtain, there is a low bed. It is a simple pallet of reed and cloth, arranged with a care that suggests knowing hands at the pillow. On the small ledge beside it rests a pressed flower, protected beneath a scrap of linen. This bloom, thin as paper, browned at the edges, is the motif we have been following. It holds, in its fragile plane, the deliberate stubbornness of memory, a thing kept for its feeling rather than its show. Consider placing it, for the moment, between the pages of your own imagination, where it can perfume thought without demanding explanation. In these private rooms, the city's small rituals are most visible. One could see an elder smoothing a child's hair before sleep, fingers trailing the way one might smooth a blanket. The gesture is as quiet as a question answered with a nod. The ritual of laying out clothes, of oiling a lamp, of setting a cup near a child's hand. These are the grammar of a household's tenderness. They do not shout. They simply ensure that the next morning will be possible, that the ordinary will arrive again. Let your breath follow the quiet here. Notice the way the inhale brings you closer to the painted garland, and how the exhale lets the room fall a little softer into its own sepia hush. You are moving through an architecture of small cell, small, sensible acts that accumulate into dwelling. This is the architecture that keeps people tethered to one another and to their days. From the frescoed room, we drift into a narrower passage that seems to take the light with it, the sort of corridor whose floor is cooler than the rooms it connects. Here, against a lintel, the chipped cup reappears like a small, stubborn truth. It sits in a shadowed niche, collecting dust in a way that keeps both safe and still. Nearby, someone has propped a small basket of knitting or twine. Perhaps it belonged to a neighbor who passed by to borrow a stitch, or to a householder who mended where needed. The presence of repair is a quiet theme in these scenes, mending a jar's handle with clay, knotting a frayed strap, pressing a tile back into place. Repair is the city's everyday devotion. We step out once more, and the city opens into a broader room. Not public yet, but the kind of place where a few neighbors might gather at dusk. The ceiling here bears a faint pattern. The walls are cool under the hand. On a small shelf rests another object, and when you look closely, you recognize it at once. A tiny terracotta figurine, the kind of toy we saw in the courtyard. Its features are worn, softened by being held, by falling, and being retrieved. A child, perhaps, left it leaning against the wall while they chased some tiny intrigue. The figurine's conformation to little fingers is memorably intimate. The moments you pass through here are filled with small motions, someone cutting a length of fabric, another folding an old garment, a quiet exchange of sewing between neighbors. There is companionship in these acts, the way one person's hands can steady a task, or how two people can turn a mended crease into a finished cloth. You might imagine a neighbor arriving with a small parcel of herbs, the scent of rosemary, like a calmness arriving on their heels. They exchange a few words, enough to be known and to know in return, and then, with the discretion of quiet civility, they depart, leaving behind the warmth of company. A light, tentative bellows of wind finds its way through a half-open shutter, carrying with it the faint memory of the sea. Remember that glimpse of horizon we allowed ourselves earlier. Let it come closer now. If you incline your step toward the periphery of the city, the street will begin to slope gently down, a subtle invitation toward the margin where stone meets shore. Along the way, you will pass a small shrine-like niche. Nothing elaborate, only a hollow in a wall where someone once placed an offering of bread, perhaps a sprig of bay, perhaps a scrap of ribbon. The niche is dusted now, and within it the residue of goodness. Crumbs, a dried leaf, a thumbed note of affection. It is a sign that, even in ordinary practice, people sought to mark the small moments. The slope carries you toward the edge where the houses loosen and gardens take over. Here, you will notice potted herbs, rosemary, rue perhaps, and a low basil whose leaves press against clay pots weathered by years. A man or woman might pause to pinch a leaf and inhale, the action as domestic as breathing. There is an economy of movement in this fringe area, slow, practical, almost reverential, as though the gardens were repositories of taste and memory. Ahead, the city becomes less closed and more articulate with the world's wider breadth. The road widens a little, the stones smoother and rounder, worn by cart rims and sandals alike. You may pass a small boat drawn up on a marginal stone, not the work of a harbor's bustle, but the kind of vessel kept for simple crossing or for fishing on calm days. Its painted sides are faded now, but you can imagine the color, a quiet green, a washed blue, once bright around the edges. Nets lie coiled nearby, ordered loops like the handwriting of those who mended them, and a few shells gleam against the grit, their inner surfaces dark with the sea's own patience. If you stop here and listen, softly, with the care of someone who knows the value of a quiet hour, you might hear the sea. It does not demand attention. Rather, it is a low, constant companion at the city's rim. There is a gentle cadence to it, a rhythm that suggests tides rather than drama, the slow alternation of leaving and returning across long, long seasons. The smell here is barely present, a lifted trace of salt and stone and sea-scented air. Imagine drawing that scent in with a soft inhalation. It sits, not as an intrusion, but as a neighboring presence, the sea's whisper to the city. The fishermen, in your imaginative stroll, are not busy with grand undertakings. They sit on low stools or on coiled nets, their hands moving in rhythms similar to those we have seen. The mosaicist's patience, the baker's practiced motion. They speak little. Their conversation is in the weave and repair of net. One might be mending a frayed knot while an elder watches and offers a suggestion, the exchange so modest it could be overlooked. But slowed down, it becomes a lesson in attention. Two pairs of hands, one teaching the other the subtle tension of cord and loop. The scene is homely and quiet, a reassurance that the world is kept by hands and humility. Notice how the pressed flower motif sometimes shifts here. Instead of a blossom pressed between tiles, it becomes a small coin or pebble left in the hollow of a boat, as if each person keeps their own talisman at hand. You might imagine a child sitting close by, holding a smooth pebble and listening to the mannered language of the nets, learning the cadence of small labors as one learns lullabies. These are the ways in which entire lifetimes are taught, not by proclamation, but by repetition, by watching the steady hands of the elder, and by copying them in small, imperfect ways that matter greatly. Beyond the shoreline, the horizon is an unhurried plain. At dusk, gulls, if any, fly low and sound like small punctuation marks across the air. The light softens into a silver that is not as bright as noon, but richer in depth, the kind of light that makes details yield rather than assert. It is in this softened light that the city returns to its interior, as households recognize the time for lamps to be trimmed, for supper to be made modestly and with care. Return with me now toward the inner streets. The air is cooling. Shutters are eased once more. You find yourself passing again by the Forum, which in the hour's hush feels almost like a remembered sentence in longer conversation. The paving stones, polished by countless steps, are now cool underfoot. The columns cast gentle stripes across the plaza. A few figures remain: an elder folding up a market cloth, a couple of friends exchanging the small, safe confidences that do not require audience. Their gestures are economical and generous. A loaf wrapped and offered, a ladle passed for a second helping, an agreement made with a small nod. These are the quotidian ways in which friendship and trust are tended. At the Forum's margin sits a bench where our pressed flour appears finally, tucked behind a loose stone. Here, someone once laid it after perhaps finding a way to make a day kinder. A token of a remembered smile, folded into a pocket and placed as a secret for someone to find. The friends who pass by do not erase it. They step lightly over the bench so as not to disturb the small offering. The bench thus becomes a place of private memory, an unnamed shrine of the city's ordinary kindnesses. Our very soft crest arrives here, not in the form of a startling revelation, but as one of those tiny, humane recoveries that nevertheless hold the weight of meaning. Picture, if you will, an evening in which a child has dropped their terracotta toy near the market, and a neighbor, seeing this, stoops without comment to return it. The child, relieved, reaches up with both hands and presses a small pebble, perhaps one of those kept from the shoreline, into the adult's palm as a thank you. The adult holds the pebble for a brief, considerate moment, and then tucks it into a pocket, not as a trophy, but as a sealed conversation. I see you. I will remember. The exchange is fleeting, and yet it is precisely the kind of tenderness that sustains communities. It is practical and symbolic in equal measure. There are other small acts around you. A woman smoothing a blanket over someone who has fallen asleep on a doorstep. An elderly man being helped to his feet by an unseen hand. A bowl of warmed porridge shared between neighbors who cannot call to one another, but whose lives intersect in trusted ways. Each act repeats the same message, that human kindness often lives in care that makes no claim and in gifts that require no audience. These gifts are the city's true inheritance. As the light thins further, the city's sounds draw inward. Doors are eased almost shut, and the last of the day's labor is tidied into boxes and niches. Lamps are trimmed. Their flames are small and near to the ground. You might imagine the tiny wicks glow as the city's heartbeat in miniature, an ember that keeps things from slipping into coldness. In one home, someone takes the chipped cup from its shadowed niche, washes it with deliberate care, and sets it once more upon a shelf where it will greet morning with the same gentle familiarity. There is reverence in that routine. not of ceremony, but of attention. Reflect for a moment on how small objects, those cups, those tiles, that pressed flower, hold us to each other through time. They are not grand monuments, but the quiet witnesses that ask only to be used and remembered. They testify not to fame, but to fidelity. Fidelity to the ordinary, to the daily maintenance of life. In the lack of grand narrative, we find instead 1,000 small stories, and in them the true loudness of a life's value, a quiet thing worth noting, and to be stated gently. This city, like all cities, carried fragility. It is possible to speak of such fragility in a way that honors rather than unsettles. Suppose, in imagining the long span of time that touches these streets, that the city was once layered in a hush so complete it seemed to fold sound into itself. Think of that hush as a soft mantle settling over stone and roof, a silence that preserved not only the objects, but their shapes of meaning. We do not need to press upon that stillness. Instead, we let it be a softening of edges, a quiet that allows details to be held as if in a hand. The hush is not spectacle. It is a pause in which the city's small mercies remain intact. Take a breath in with that image, the hush as a gentle covering. Exhale and imagine the city breathing softly beneath it, sheltered in the way a folded blanket shelters a sleeping body. The breath you take connects your present to their ordinary past. It is, for a moment, the same breath. As night deepens, households settle into private rituals that echo the earlier domestic scenes. Lamps are set on low tables, bowls are covered with cloth. Last words are spoken in the tender code that people acquire when they live in close quarters. You might imagine the sound of an old song, hummed by someone mending a sandal, a fragment of melody that travels down the street and touches windows like a small blessing. Even the walls seem to lean in, as if to listen. We now turn toward the inner, quiet rooms once more, where sleep itself is prepared with a care that is surprisingly like prayer. In one house, an elder spreads a blanket, tucks a child carefully, and strokes the child's brow in that motion that says, "I am here." In another, a neighbor leaves a bowl of warm broth on a doorstep with no expectation of thanks. It is an offering made because the giver knows what it is to be sustained. These are not dramatic acts. They are long tending and attention made visible. As you picture these scenes, allow your own body to be shaped by them. Let your limbs grow heavier with each remembered gesture. With every out-breath, imagine something small being put back in place. An errant tile pressed gently into the mosaic, a toy tucked beside a pillow, a cup set upon its shelf. The world arranges itself in quiet increments. You might find that the simplest images are the most calming. A hand smoothing fabric, a lamp dimming, a neighbor's step receding in the night. These are the rhythms that make for rest. There is, in these rooms, a sense of repair that is physical and moral at once. The mosaic maker's pattern, the baker's folded dough, the fisherman's knot, each is an act that says, things can be made serviceable again. This sentiment is both humble and durable. Consider it now as something you might let into your own chest. The knowledge that smallness does not equal insignificance, that tending matters more than pronouncement. It is a consolation without grandeur, and therefore perhaps closer to what we often need. We have met many small images on our walk, the loaf cooling on a sill, the mosaicist's hand, the child's clay figurine, the pressed flower nestling between tiles, the chipped cup. Each image is like a stone in a low wall assembled with care. If you place them in your mind now, one by one, you create a boundary against haste, a kept place within which you may rest. Picture them now, softly, in whatever order they choose to appear, and let their arrangement be a gentle cairn on which your thoughts can settle. There is a final, tender scene I would like you to imagine before we move toward rest. It is simple and entirely plausible. A neighbor, who knows an elder's habit of rising at the first light, prepares a small plate and leaves it on the bedside table. The plate contains not a feast, but a modest portion: a bit of bread, a few dried figs, wrapped with a leaf to keep it fresh. The elder wakes later and finds the plate, and in the way they lift a corner of the wrapping, they understand that they were seen. The plate is a quiet covenant. The giver will keep watch in whatever small ways are necessary. This is the sort of human continuity that threads the vignettes together. It is practical kindness turned into custom. Let that image sit with you as the city's lamps continue to burn low. Imagine the streets outside falling into a soft, steady silence, the windows dimming like the closing of a book. The sea remains in the distance, a patient companion that does not intrude but keeps a long, slow rhythm. The pressed flower is folded back into its linen. The chipped cup returns to its ledge. The terracotta toy rests in a shadow. The city breathes, and you breathe with it. It is time now, gently, to bring this imagined walk back to your own room. As you make that transition in your mind, let the textures of the city fold into those of your bed, the woven mat into your sheets, the low table into the bedside, the pressed flower into a dream. Picture your bedding as a courtyard roofed in warmth, your pillow as a threshold like the low lintel of a welcoming house. Consider the way the city's small gestures, mending, offering, returning, reflect the care you may have known today or carried with you for a long time. Breathe in gently and imagine yourself crossing that last soft threshold into rest. With the inhale, collect the good images of the evening: a loaf on a sill, patient hands placing tiles, a pebble tucked in a child's palm, a bowl left at a doorstep. With the exhale, let go of the day's sharper edges, the demands that do not serve your rest, and feel them settle like a fine dust at the foot of the bed, harmless and distant. Continue in that rhythm. Draw in a quiet thought. Release what need not travel with you through the night. There is no need for you to rouse from this calm. The city's ordinary caretaking is enough. Imagine someone, somewhere in that reflected Pompeii, turning a woven blanket just so and smoothing a child's hair. Imagine the comfort of a cup set near a sleeper's hand. These are gestures you can carry into sleep as if tucked under your pillow. Hold them lightly, as a companion rather than a task. If it helps, let your awareness follow a small, repetitive detail: the chipped cup, the pressed flower, the mosaic tile. Each time coaxing your attention a little closer to the slow center. Let this motif move you toward stillness. The cup sits. The flower is folded. The tile is pressed into place. Each small completion is an invitation to sink further into the mattress, to let weight draw you down and the day's tautness unwind. There is, in concluding, a small and unobtrusive invitation I will offer, as I offered one earlier. If this quiet stroll has soothed you, a small like or a gentle follow will bring more evenings such as this. Only if you wish. Nothing asked beyond your quiet consent. Now, settle fully. Feel your limbs lengthen and soften. Allow the breath to widen without strain, as if you were filling a chamber of quiet within you that echoes nothing but rest. Picture the city's hush. No spectacle, simply preservation, folded like a shawl across your shoulders. Let the image of the last act you saw, a loaf cupped in cloth, a hand smoothing a blanket, a pebble accepted and tucked into a pocket, be the final note that escorts you into sleep. You are safe to let go. Breathe in the calm. Exhale the rest. The city sleeps beneath its modest lamps. The sea keeps its unhurried counsel beyond the rooftops. Your bed is a small courtyard. Your breath, now slow and measured, is the only sound required. Good night. Sleep well.